Oh, brief test. I'm gonna go to the restroom. Okay.
Like we're getting pretty close to having our quorum set. Go ahead and call the meeting to order and have our statement read. Dan, are you reading the code statement or is it Keith?
No, I will. Sorry about that. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Pursuant to the declared state of emergency in the Commonwealth of Virginia in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to protect the public health and safety of the long-range complaint subcommittee members, staff, and the general public, today's meeting is being held electronically. This electronic meeting is required to complete essential business on behalf of the region. Per the requirements of the Code of Virginia, the agenda and all supporting documentation were posted on the TPO website for public review, and electronic copies of this information were provided to the LRTP subcommittee members and other interested parties. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The live stream is available for viewing on the Regional Connection YouTube channel, and the recording will be made available via the TPO website. The general public was provided an opportunity to comment on today's agenda in advance of the meeting via two options. Members of the public were invited to email comments to the LRTP subcommittee, and members of the public were also invited to call into a dedicated phone line where comments could be recorded for LRTP subcommittee members. No comments were received via either option as of 24 hours before this meeting. Before we begin today's remote meeting, I need to remind members of a few important housekeeping rules. Everyone is asked to keep their phones and computers muted except for when you are providing input. Please identify yourself by name and the locality or agency you represent when you provide input. Do the same should you provide a motion or a second. All votes taken today will be made by a roll call vote and recorded in the minutes. Thank you for your cooperation and patience, and now we will take attendance.
Good afternoon, everybody. We'll start with Chesapeake, Troy Eisenberger.
Hey, this is Tracy Schoenfeld. Troy's not here today, but I'm here for him.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Okay, Gloucester County, Carol Rizzio. Thank you. Hampton, Mike Hayes.
This is Lynn Keenan for Hampton.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Isle of Wight, Jamie Oliver.
Present.
Thank you, Jamie. James City County, Paul Holt.
Here.
Thank you, Paul. Newport News, Brian Stelly.
Here.
Norfolk, Debbie Mangiaracina.
Present.
Thank you. Pocosin, Dan and O'Connell. Portsmouth, Carl Jackson. Southampton, Beth Lewis. I thought I saw
Present.
Beth. Thank you, Beth. Suffolk, Jason Souders. Was that you, Jason?
I'm also here.
I'm sorry, was that Robert? Was that you?
Yes, I'm also, I didn't hear Jason, but I'm here.
Okay. I see Jason Souders on there, I think.
Yes, I'm on here.
Great, thank you, Jason. Virginia Beach, Katie Shannon.
Present.
Thank you. And Mark, I believe you're here as well.
Yep, Mark Shea.
Great, thank you. Williamsburg,
And
Carolyn Murphy.
Elaine Lynn is here too, I think, from Virginia Beach.
Okay, thank you. Carolyn Murphy, Williamsburg.
Present.
Great, thank you. York, Tim Cross.
Here.
Thank you. HRT, Ray Amoruso.
Present. Would you change the spelling to my name, Amoruso?
Sure, no problem, Ray.
Also, I believe Sam Sink from HRT is here.
Yes, present.
Great, thank you, Sam. For some reason, my keyboard is not working right now. Interesting. Okay. I'll mark you down, Sam. WADA, Josh Moore.
I'm here.
Okay, cool. I'll keep going through roll call, and then when I figure out the problem, I'll fix this. Grant Sparks, DRPT.
Present.
Thank you. Eric Springfield, VDOT.
Present.
Thank you, Eric. And BPA, Barb Nelson.
Present.
Thank you. Is there anybody else attending the meeting that I missed?
Angela Rico with Newport News is here.
Okay, thank you, Angela. I still can't type. Okay. Anybody else? Great, thank you very much.
All right, with no submitted public comments and seeing the general public in the room to speak, let's move on to agenda item number 4, approval of the agenda. Does anybody have modifications or corrections they'd like to make? All right, hearing none, can I get a motion for approval?
Carolyn Murphy, Williamsburg, I motion to approve.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a motion. Can I get a second?
Katie Shannon from Virginia Beach, I second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? All right, going for a concurrence. Does anyone have objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Moving to agenda item number 5, the minutes of the January 22nd meeting, which wasn't our last meeting, it was the Friday meeting. I trust everyone has taken the time to review those, and does anyone have any corrections, modifications that need to be made? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve?
Jamie Oliver, move to approve.
Thank you, ma'am. I have a motion. May I have a second?
Carolyn Murphy, second. Williamsburg.
Thank you, ma'am. Motion is second. Any discussion? Once again, for concurrence, does anyone object to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. On to item 6, is the 2045 fiscal constraint for active transportation and transit candidate projects. Ms. Stith, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to pull up a presentation. All right, hopefully you can all see my full slides. All right, so as Brian said, actually, is this the right? Sorry. No, I just didn't change the title. That's the right one. Okay. There's my little guy. He's further down the path. Where's that finish line? We're almost there. Okay, so as I stated in the previous two meetings, first one was focusing fiscal constraint on the highway regional priority projects. Yesterday's meeting was focusing on the remaining roadway candidate projects, fiscally constraining those. And then today we're focusing on transit and active transportation. We still may potentially need a fourth meeting. As we get today's recommendations, we'll look through to see if we need to clean up any of our fiscal constraint assumptions, see if there's any gaps. If we do need a fourth meeting, I'm thinking, if there's no objections, that we would meet 30 minutes before the next TTAP. But you'll definitely see email correspondence from me over the next couple of days if the staff thinks that is necessary. And this is just a quick reminder slide for any members that were not on yesterday's call, because this may come up as part of our guiding principles for our 2045 long-range transportation plan. We do have a 10% set aside for grouped projects. So in terms of transit and active transportation, a lot of these types of projects would fall under this grouped category. So for the purposes of a long-range transportation plan, we don't need to list a lot of transit amenities or even bus routes or bus replacements. It is captured by this group set aside. And same with a lot of the active transportation projects. There's no requirement to list an active transportation project, but in listing some of the more regional transit and active transportation efforts, it helps promote multimodal transportation planning for our region. So there's definitely a lot of value, and this is why we do list some of these projects in our plan. Also, just a quick reminder, yesterday's meeting, we did modify some of the fiscal constraint guidelines in terms of the highway transit funding split and how we're fiscally constraining RSTP and the Cmac funding pots. The next slide will show this better. So originally, when we had set up our fiscal constraint guidelines for the 2045 long-range transportation plan, we were assuming a 70-30 highway transit funding split for RSTP and a 60-40 highway transit funding split for CMAC. Realizing that there are no eligible LRTP highway candidate projects the way we've structured the long-range transportation plan, we don't want to leave $200 million of CMAC dollars on the table and not constrain projects. So it was decided to shift and use all RSTP assumptions on highway and then CMAC on transit and maybe active transportation. And this by no means means that transit and active transportation can't pursue real RSTP dollars. This is just simply for fiscal constraint for our long-range transportation plan. This is a reminder slide of the 2040 LRTP transit projects. In our 2040 plan, we do have a lot of studies, again, mostly intended to promote transit planning in our long-range transportation plan document. I know a lot of these studies won't roll over into the 2045 LRTP, but we may come back and visit the slide. There are probably some of these that will have to roll over into our 2045 long-range transportation plan. As we did yesterday with the roadway projects, staff did go through the Smart Scale Round 4 recommendations, and we also looked at active RSTP and CMAC projects in terms of transit and active transportation. So for Smart Scale Round 4, and again, these are just recommendations, there is a recommendation to fund one of our candidate projects. It's the Western Branch Rails to Trails Phase 2 in Chesapeake. And we also noted that there's a Suffolk Express commuter bus. We don't have to reference this particular project as a line item but in the LRTP, but it might be a good idea to do that. It doesn't hurt us to do that, especially if it's recommended for smart scale funding, and it's a commuter bus route. In terms of RSTP and CMAC, active projects include the Naval Station Norfolk Transit Extension Study, as well as the Fixed Guideway Transit Extension Study to Chesapeake. And then there's also an active project for South Side Bike Lane Network that is a candidate project. So in terms of transit, available transit funding sources for our 2045 long-range transportation plan, as all of you are aware, there is a new Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund, HRRTF. The estimate for the fiscal year 2021 to 2045 estimate is $827 million. In speaking with HRT, now this is a very new funding source, so we're making some assumptions here today, knowing that this is very new, so things may change. But the $827 million estimate has not set aside money for maintenance, operations, or state of good repair. So if you recall, when we start with our transportation revenue estimate for our region, which is about $28 billion for Hampton Roads, right off the top, we have to pull off maintenance, operations, and state of good repair funds. So for us, for the 2045 LRTP, that's about $16 billion that comes right off the top before we can even look at additional capacity improvements. So the same thing would apply to this new Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund. And in speaking with HRT, the estimate right now is to set aside about a third for these maintenance, operations, state of good repair type commitments. So that'd be about $273 million. The rest can be used to constrain the 757 Express, which consists of the regional backbone and limited express. And Ray, I know you're on the line. If I've misspoke there, please correct me before I move forward.
Dale, that's exactly correct. That's our expectation. The money will, the 66 and 1/3% will go to support exactly as described, the 13 backbone routes, the MAX and PCS routes, the facilities, passenger amenities, technology investments, and then the labor costs associated with delivering the actual service.
Terrific. Thank you for confirming that, Ray. Some other fiscal constraint assumptions. As I stated earlier, typically in a long-range transportation plan, what we would list are major fixed guideway type projects. Bus routes, replacements, facility improvements are captured under that grouped projects set aside. For the 2045 long-range transportation plan, again, we want to enhance and highlight transit planning in the region. As we just discussed with this new Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund, we would make sure that we are recognizing and highlighting that we have this regional money, a third of which is being set aside for the maintenance, operations, state of good repair, and the other remaining 2/3 would be set aside for enhanced transit service for the 757 Express, which, between 2021 and 2045, there's still so much conceptual out there, but setting aside and recognizing that there's going to be improvements in that time period for this regional backbone 757 Express system. We also have a potential opportunity maybe to constrain construction the Peninsula High Capacity Transit Project, which I think the estimate right now is 332, but Ray or Sam, I think you mentioned that this might even be a little bit lower for a year of expenditure estimate. I don't know if either one of you could confirm that.
Yeah, I think the 332 is for a 2030 year of expenditure, and realistically, you could go as low as year 2028. That would be our next opportunity to pursue smart scale funding. So, you could bring that estimate down a little bit and make room for other projects if you wanted.
Okay, so when we get to the spreadsheet to constrain, that might free up a little bit more money for fiscal constraint. So we'll convert, if we use that 2028 opening year, see what that gets us for our year of expenditure cost estimate. There's also the transit studies, the active RSTP transit studies that I mentioned on a previous slide. And maybe there's other additional transit studies that we would want to determine today to include in the 2045 long-range transportation plan. In the past, for the 2040, we did have a line item that said enhanced bus service and bus replacement for our transit agencies. For the 2040, it was for HRT and WADA. Because HRT now is managing this Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund, which will cover the 757 Express, staff is going to recommend that we still have these set aside line items for enhanced bus service and replacement, highlighting WADA and Suffolk Transit. And then if there is any balance left over after we take care of these, then it would be a recommendation to maybe use some of those Cmac assumptions on active transportation. But we'll see that once we get to the spreadsheet to see if there is a balance left over. In terms of active transportation, using just the transportation alternative set aside, after we take the 10% grouped project set aside, that leaves us with about 51 million to constrain regional active transportation projects. And then depending on what happens with transit, there could be a little bit of CMAQ as well. And then as with bus routes and bus replacements, and as I stated earlier, it's not necessary to individually list active transportation projects in our long-range transportation plan, but it's also just a fantastic way to showcase multimodal planning and help position these active transportation projects to be more competitive for funding sources moving forward. So we'll get to the spreadsheet, and at the end of today's discussion, hopefully we can have another recommendation. The recommended action would be to recommend TTAC approval of a list of regional transit and active transportation projects to include in the fiscally constrained 2040 long-range transportation plan. So before we open the spreadsheet, are there any questions from the group?
Dale, for the Peninsula high capacity transit, if it looks like the most likely goal for us for the funding would be a combination of new starts or small starts and then Commonwealth funding and local funding. Is there the capacity to bring down the financially constrained burden for that project with the expectation of the outside funding? Or do we need to maintain that same dollar value for the purposes of what we're doing now?
So if I understand your question, Brian, you're saying that there's an opportunity for the Peninsula capacity project, the BRT project, that it could get new starts and also Commonwealth and local funding on that project?
Yeah, so it's one of those things that we'd be aiming to have 50% federal participation and then 25 made up between the two cities and the Commonwealth through either smart scale or some other CMAC RCP type piece. And it's really looking at the price tag for it for the purposes of what we're doing. I was curious if we can lower that cost requirement to try and fit some other things in as well.
And so one of the guidelines, the federal guidelines, is to recognize reasonably available funds. So if you can tell me today that the 50% of new starts is reasonably available, and then 25% from local is reasonably available, we should be able to factor that in. Certainly want to hear from the others on the call. And then if you said the Commonwealth that 25% would be smart scale, I still think we would use these regional pots we have today, like we're saying with CMAC, as that 25% commitment.
Dale, this is Ray Amoruso. The capital investment grants, formerly Small Starts, New Starts program, is not a slam dunk. The project will have to be ranked and rated high enough to be eligible for capital investment grant funding. The funding plan laid out in the environmental documentation anticipates up to a 50% federal share, 25% from the state via a smart scale grant ask, and 25% in combination between the two cities on the peninsula. I don't know how the TPO wants to handle the uncertainty of the CIG, which is highly prescriptive in terms of evaluating the merit of the project and highly competitive nationally. So I just want to caution everyone. I know you use the word reasonably. it's a subjective word, and I would love to get 50%. I don't know until we ask them to rank and rate us, and that would occur after the two city councils grant us that opportunity. We really don't know what we might get from the feds. Brian, that's just the truth about that program right now.
I understood. It was one of those things, just my own ignorance and interest in trying to get a better handle wrapped around the piece.
I know.
Well, one thing we could do, and that's a great point, Ray. Thank you for bringing it up. Is we could reflect at least the 25% local commitment, and so then that would only leave the 75% that today we could constrain with the available revenues for the plan. And at least that helps maybe position this project. If we can show it constrained for construction, it might help position it to make it more competitive for the CID or other funding sources.
You know, it would. The first question in the financial criteria from the feds are, where are the sources of what they call non-federal funding coming from? To them, state and city funds are non-federal funds. It's all local to them. So, you know, I'm anticipating a successful smart scale application from the state. And then the city commitments would come after they endorse a locally preferred alternative and say we're ready to move forward to the next phase of project development. I don't anticipate that occurring this calendar year. We'll get the environmental document and LPA endorsed, and then we'll see what the appetite is from both city councils are moving forward. But the more we can do to peg the non-federal sources in this plan as certainty, I think the healthier that will be.
So, Rand, to make sure I'm understanding right, it'd be a reasonable thing to take 25% out of that 332 as being locally sourced funds that wouldn't come through pass-through funds from the TPO or some smart scale type fund.
25 from the state through smart scale grant, and then theoretically 25% from the two localities. So that's actually 50%.
Right, but we've got smart scale as one of our funding categories for this.
Okay.
So
then 25 from the two cities.
All right. So Dale, I'm comfortable reducing it. Hampton, do you have any objections to reducing that piece for the overall cost?
This is Lynn. I am not sure where Hampton stands as far as commitment. Has our staff already engaged in this? This is not sure that I was aware we were committing to 25% with Newport News.
So it's Ray Amoruso again. So the staff that's been involved to date is Brian DeProfio and Mike Hayes. Now, there is no commitment from the city in this 5 minutes. We are going to get in front of your council actually to talk about this February 16th, I think. No, that's Virginia Beach. February 10th. I can't remember. But the only thing that we're asking the cities in this calendar year is to endorse the locally preferred alternative so we can get through the NEPA process and put that to bed. Both city managers have made it very clear, as well as city council, at this time, they're not ready to commit financially. They're not saying they're not going to commit in the future, just not at this time.
Okay, so for the sake of this call, I'll say that Hampton is supportive and will defer to council once they've made a further decision on that.
All right, so we can take the 332 by 0.75 to get the new burden for the long-range plan.
Well, and actually, with what Sam Sink had said, using the different year of expenditure, that cost estimate goes down to 264.5 million.
Dale, is that possible to share your screen again so we can see?
Yeah.
We're actually going to pull the spreadsheet up. That might be better so we can see the numbers.
Thank you.
So that cost estimate, Keith, for Peninsula High Capacity Transit should be 264.5. And then we said 25% of that. Did Brian 25%?
Yeah, and that 25% is shared equally, so it's 12.5% from each city, in theory.
So then that leaves, I would say, and recognize, even though we're using Cmac for fiscal constraint, that doesn't mean Cmac's going to be used to fund this project. Reactions from the committee? Assumption?
Dale, it's Ray again. May I ask one question?
Sure.
We'll be through the NEPA clearance process. They're still going, if council wants to move, if both councils want to move on to the next step, there's other, I'll use the word studies, but it's not really studies. There's preliminary engineering, 30% level design that has to occur that I would like to see eligible as a Cmac project. Would it be eligible under Cmac? It's not just construction that we're talking about here. There's more activity to go.
That is getting into the reprogramming world, and probably, I don't know if Pavitra is on the line, if she would know, but I can ask John Mahaley. I know he would know the answer to that.
Sorry, Dale, can you repeat the question again? My WebEx is this Pavitra?
Ray, can you repeat your question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure. Okay. So in the past, let's say for the Norfolk Tide and even when Virginia Beach still had their active project, preliminary engineering activities, 30% level of design and final design activities were eligible under Cmac for funding. And I'm just asking the question, is that still the case for the Peninsula High Capacity Transit project?
Let me follow up and with John and get back to you before we wrap up this meeting. So.
Okay, that's fine.
In my LRTP world, the answer is yes, but I think you're asking like real. You want to know like really, is it available? Which would be
well, in the LRTP world is at least a start, but yeah. Thank you.
Any other comments or reactions for the Peninsula High Capacity Transit project? If not, we can go ahead and start with the HRRTF funding source, which we've already set aside the 1/3 for maintenance, which leaves us a balance of 552 million, which would go to the 757 Express system, which we know will be a number of routes and amenities and different things that Ray can describe much better than me. For the purposes of the LRTP, we would probably show this as maybe a map or high level, just for the public so they understand what is this investment for the 757 Express. So that's easy to constrain. There's only that one eligible project for this funding source. So Keith, if you want to go ahead and mark that. So then that brings us to the Cmac assumptions, and I think we'll come back to the line item set-asides for enhanced bus service and bus replacement for WADA and Suffolk Transit. First, we will look at the studies that need to be reflected in the long-range transportation plan due to their status of where they are in RSTP and CMAC and moving forward in the planning world. Naval Station Norfolk Transit extension we had as a study in the 2040 for 20 million. So Ray or Sam, is this something that we need to also reflect in the 2045?
Absolutely. Can I back up 1 minute, Dale? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Can you scroll up again? It's just dawning on me. I want to make sure that I understand when you say bus replacement for WADA and Suffolk, There are fleet needs that aren't related to the HRRTF 757 Express program. That is just regular old bus service that will continue to need support under Cmac for bus replacement. So does HRT need that as a line item as well? Because it's
That
only,
would be captured in our 10% set aside.
okay. I just wanted to make sure of that because there are other fleet needs that aren't related to 757 Express.
Right.
Okay.
Recognize that. And
Sorry.
even with these set asides for WADA and Suffolk Transit, again, we don't need to. They're also captured in our 10% set aside. It's just elevating and highlighting the transit planning that is going on in these two areas.
Sure. So back to your question on Norfolk Naval Station. Repeat it, please.
The cost estimate we had for the 2040 for a study, the study to continue was 20 million.
Yes, that would be correct. We're in the DEIS phase now. We're going to, next phase will include an FAIS and 30% design. So yes, that should be the right amount.
And then the other study that we had as active was the high capacity transit extension to Chesapeake or Greenbrier area, and we had it as 5 million in the 2040.
For the next phase of that, correct.
And Keith, if you can scroll down, I don't know if we had other, which will come back to the active transportation. Yes, those are our transit assumptions. Is it fine with this committee if we just focus on transit before we get to the active transportation?
I prefer that.
Are we able to sort the list just for transit like we did a couple of times yesterday?
Yes.
Hey Dale, this is Carl from Portsmouth. Have we also included any of the projected smart scale projects that are transit related?
For round 4?
Yeah.
Yes, there's quite a few smaller transit projects that will be captured by the group set aside that I'm not listing here. The only one that caught my eye for round 4 was the Suffolk commuter bus that we may, in addition to the enhanced bus service bus replacement for Suffolk Transit, also list that smart scale recommendation for the Suffolk commuter bus. The other recommendations coming out of round 4 are automatically consistent with the long range transportation plan.
Okay, great. And does that include the Portsmouth Transit Station and Greenwood Drive lot?
I believe I saw that on the list. I can pull it up real quick, unless someone from VDOT is on the call and they move quicker than I can look.
Yeah, Dale, they are on the smart scale list, the 2 Portsmouth projects right now.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So do they need to be a part of this process, or are they covered with the group set aside, or?
Right, they're already deemed consistent, so they're covered by that group set aside.
Okay, thank you.
Dale, this is Ray again. Does that also include previously awarded smart scale from round 3 and round 2? Because I think it was round 3 that we got awarded. There's a new service from Gloucester to Newport News Shipyard for smart scale funding for a new route from Gloucester. So is that automatically captured because it was a previous round?
Yeah, yes, and that's captured under our grouped projects.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
You have a lookup for that table for prioritization costs that just is.
Really?
Yeah, and it's a lookup to 20.
Give us 2 minutes, technical difficulties.
Hey Dale, since we are under technical difficulties, I called John, and so from his funding, this is Pavitra, from the funding perspective for Cmac RSTP, he said a study is just funded as a study, the 30% design PE, that doesn't necessarily affect the funding, so it's just a study as such is funded.
Thank you for getting that so quickly, Pavitra. It was my fault. So Keith will be bringing it back up. Sorry, guys. It couldn't all be smooth, right? All 3 meetings. While Keith pulls that
Sorry,
back
Dale,
up.
you're still the only one that could ever pull this off, so don't worry. I have all the faith and confidence in you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So before we look at the set-asides for WADA and Suffolk Transit, looking at these other transit projects, you know, I don't think we can constrain. I guess maybe let's see, we have the ferry service from Norfolk to Hampton that scored fairly well at 22 million. Is that something that the committee would want to constrain or maybe even put in as a study? I'm not sure where that project is.
I think we would need a study, Dale. There's no recent work on such a thing. There's no landing identified, no vehicle type identified that meets Coast Guard requirements, no funding partners for the operation of ferries. So we would need a study to figure all that out.
And what would be a reasonable estimate? Would it be 5 million for that study?
Yeah, that's probably a little bit much.
So 2.5, 2? I don't even know.
I mean, you're asking me to venture a guess?
Yes.
Why don't you half it to 2.5?
Perfect.
Well, hey, this is Josh Mortwada. Dale and Ray, before we put a number in that, would it be better to maybe add both of these ferry bits for a study together? And that's kind of more of a question for you, Ray, whether it makes sense to study the new ferry service and this expansion and combine them into one study, or just leave them broken apart.
Josh, I don't know where that other one came from. I don't own up to that, nor do I see any recent dialogue with that institution about a ferry servicer. I think that's a holdover from long ago. Who made that request to ODU? I've never.
It was and Teresa's on this call if I speak here, but I think it was a public submission and also a rollover from 2040. And originally it was ODU and Naval Station Norfolk, but then we heard that Naval Station Norfolk
will not allow passenger ferry service for non-naval personnel, and they don't have a dock that they feel can be secured sitting next to their fleet of vehicle boats, ships. They view the ferry as a moving bomb. So forget the Navy base. ODU implies that they're a willing funding partner. If it came from a citizen, I respect that opinion, and if it's on there, it's on there. If you want to study it, so be it. But who I'm too practical. Who's going to fund that? You need a funding partner.
I mean, if that's the case, then we just leave it alone. I didn't know if that was something that had where that had come from either.
Yeah.
Well, how about this? I recommend a substitute. I think there's another ferry study to enhance the existing service and then to go to Harbor Park. Could that be included in the study? Because that's something that Portsmouth has been interested in, to improve the existing service and to have service from High Street to Harbor Park.
We have that during the ball season, Carl. You talk about
from North Landing, yeah.
Oh, North Land. Oh,
yeah,
or are you talking about? I'm sorry. Are you talking about the Midtown Tunnel parallel service, something that comes to a park and ride on your side of the city over the Midtown Tunnel? That I've heard.
No, I'm not sure about that. No, I just mean looking at the existing service and seeing how it could be enhanced and improving service between High Street and Harbor Park.
Sure, it might make sense given that there's going to be a casino at Harbor Park by 2045. And since it only operates seasonally right now during the ball season, it might make sense to study that.
Yeah, and not that we want to send people to Norfolk's casino because we're trying to do one of our own. But
I thought you were thinking regionally here.
yes, regionally to have enhancements to the existing service at the 3 stops or the 4 stops that the ferry makes now. Anything that we can do to enhance that service and to enhance frequency, that would be great.
I don't know the methodology, Dale, for substituting. You tell me.
Maybe we just do like what Josh was suggesting is just do a ferry study and leave that broad for the 2045 LRTP and set aside $5 million for a ferry study. And that
To
could
look
be
at variety.
Right.
Okay. I'm comfortable with that.
Idea.
I'm comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, that should be fine. And then from that, we can draw what what would be good projects to fund, and what's a priority then.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
It is.
Are there any other of these transit projects, regional transit projects? Any of these need to be reflected in the 2045 LRTP? We can start from the top. I'll call them off in case the print's too small. We're going to come back to the enhanced set aside, but we have, let's see, we're not worried about the ferry. We have the higher speed intercity passenger rail that gets brought up a lot by the public. I'm not quite sure where that is in the whole DEIS, FEIS process, but I don't know if there's, if it's done being studied or if there's still potential to study something for high-speed rail.
Yeah, I believe that study is contingent upon the completion of all the work at Long Bridge and then the DC to Richmond studies. So it's got some preliminary steps before it can get real legs under it.
Dale, I thought this too was mainly being DRPT was kind of driving this and mainly sort of funding this. So I don't know right now if we really need to put too much into it, unless they come back for like a local match or something, and use the money elsewhere, because I think this is a state priority.
Yeah, and I had email correspondence with Grant Sparks, who I think is on our call today. So we can sort of, like, if I'm understanding it, we're sort of in a holding pattern for our region until there's other state initiatives that are taken care of. But if there is anything from DRPT that we could reflect it to draw attention again to high speed and intercity passenger rail. I don't know, Grant, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if there is any information you could, maybe speak to today or send me later.
Yeah, Dale, I'll have to get back to you on that. I did forward this on to our rail division and asked for some comments, and I have not yet heard back from them, but I will circle back with them after this call and forward you anything that I received from them.
Fantastic, appreciate that, Grant. Let's see, then that leaves us with the high capacity transit extension to Suffolk. This was a public submitted candidate project, and I know it's very conceptual, so I'm not even sure if it's at a stage to consider a study, but would love to hear from either from any of our Suffolk stakeholders about that project.
Yes, hello, this is Jason Souders, and just like you stated, we've talked about before, Dale. This was submitted as a suggestion by a citizen. There's been a little bit of discussion, but we have not made any progress with any type of study, or there really has been little discussion about this concept.
So if we don't include it for the 2045, that would be fine. Maybe something that we would readdress at future amendments or the next 2050 long-range transportation plan.
I would think that would be appropriate.
Okay. Great. So if we, Keith, if you can scroll back up. So we have, what is it, 130 million left for Cmac. So we do want to put a set aside for WADA and Suffolk Transit, and really the amount, because we already have our group set aside. This is really sort of just an arbitrary number that we come up with, and the point would be to again highlight the regional transit planning that goes on in these two areas, and then possibly save some of this money for constraining active transportation projects. So I don't know if anyone has an idea of what that set aside could be or should be. I think for the 2040 for WADA, we had around 40 some odd million for the set aside.
I don't have an exact number for you right now, Dale, but if that's traditionally what you put, I think we're fine with that. I can talk with Zach and see there. And just, we're talking about 40 to 45, right? That 5-year window.
It would just be, it could be, some number, 40, and it would be for the 21 to 2045 window. And again, that's not limiting to that amount by any means. It's just to make sure we can individually list your activities in our long-range transportation plan. I mean, honestly, we could put 10 million here and it would be fine. We would still be listing this enhanced bus service and bus replacement.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get some kind of accurate numbers for you and stuff. So that's just why I was asking.
Do we want to put 40 for now? 40, 45? Is there a preference? Round it up to 50? I don't know. And I would assume we would do the same for WADA and Suffolk, or would we want to do lesser for Suffolk because it's a smaller area? Looking for any feedback from the subcommittee.
If you're at 40, a 10% bump for inflation would get you at 44. So if you went, say, 10% on each of the numbers they had in 2040, it would give a little bit of growth, seeing as it's farther down the road. What would those numbers come to for Suffolk?
So you said put 44 for WADA, and then
Just a 10% bump over whatever we had in the 2040 plan. So you had 40 million at 10% at 44.
right. We didn't have Suffolk in the 2040 Suffolk Transit.
All right.
I think they came online after we adopted the plan.
So much for my simple plan. You have wisdom and insight to provide?
Want to do half of what's WADA? I mean, is LJ on the call?
We'll certainly take half of it.
Thank you, Robert.
I was going to say that should be good for both of us. That should give Suffolk some room for expansion and stuff, and I think that's going to fit. That's fitting about within our current expectations for service levels.
Fantastic. Thank you, Josh. So I think that would wrap up transit. Anyone have any questions before we
Hey,
move on
Dale.
to? Yes.
This is Kevin. Quick question for you. So maybe it's a Ray Armoruso question. Of the 551.9 million that you are looking at for HERTIF, is that pay-go year over year, or are you contemplating the issuance of debt to try to achieve more projects over a longer period of time?
I don't even think we've thought that far into it, Kevin. We the only assumption we've made so far is setting aside 1/3 for the maintenance, state of good repair operations, and then leaving that other 2/3 for investing in the 757 Express, which we recognize could be projects, and then as you're bringing up, could also be some debt financing, debt service.
Yeah, all that makes very good sense, being conservative. I just wanted to kind of throw out that concept, of what HR TAC has done with the HRTF. At $180 million a year, we have a $6 billion program now, so including the HRELN. So I just wanted to comment that, this is a great start. I think Ray and his team over at HRT have done a great job setting it up, getting it going. And, as we become more mature in our way, we move forward in the program development. Let's not look away from the potential of, bundling resources, but also looking at some future financing options that may help with some of these bigger ticket items that can't be achieved quite yet.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Kevin, when we get to that point, we would treat those assumptions like we did with the highway regional priority projects, and we would actually reflect that, sort of take it off the top, some of those debt service and financing fees before we get to capacity.
Sure, no problem. I had a passenger rail comment too, if you wanted to go back to that while I've got your attention.
Sure.
Okay, so, just what I've been led to believe, in somewhat of my lay understanding of where we are with rail in Virginia, the challenge I kind of see with high-speed rail for Hampton roads is going to be a real challenge, I think, in the near future. But higher frequency and more reliable service may actually fall into a better category. I would hate for us in the region to have a high-speed rail item that doesn't move ahead without maybe not including that there is additional frequency coming to Norfolk, but there's also one in the Tier 1 document contemplated for an increased frequency to Newport News. That's conventional speed intercity rail. So just wanted to throw that out just for discussion purposes on the rail side of this, is that although we may not see high-speed rail in the long future for Hampton roads, we could certainly try to get ingested into the process of how do we deal with increased frequencies of conventional service, and how the reliability of that between Hampton roads and Richmond could be contemplated and probably more realistically realized.
Those are great points, and it may be whether, I don't know if we would do it line item, but certainly speak to it in text in our funding plan about the increased frequency. To at least, for those public people that are interested in more rail, to show that there is planning being done towards increasing access to rail.
So Dale, for the funding program that's on the screen now, we'd be looking at taking 64.9 million in the Cmac and moving it to transportation alternatives programs to add to 51.
It would still stay under Cmac, that's 64.9, but we would be able to constrain active transportation projects
with it.
That.
Okay. Does anyone have objections to moving on to active transportation? Any more thoughts or feeling towards the transit category? All right, hearing none, let's start chapter 2.
All right. So Birthplace of America Trail is the highest scoring project. That cost estimate is for the entire facility, Southside and Peninsula. And clearly we cannot constrain that entire piece. But I know there's, even amongst this candidate list, there are components of the Birthplace of America Trail. So there are better experts than me on the different pieces of this Birthplace of America Trail as to which pieces would be the logical ones that we should constrain into the 2045 LRTP.
Now, for the component units of that overall trail system, if they're, I'm saying the smallish, the half a mile here, quarter mile there, that sort of thing, would would those specifically need to be called out as components, or can that be almost an umbrella program or a undeclared part of the LRTP?
Right, it would be captured under our group set aside. Certainly, you know, to help elevate it, if offline we could package up all these smaller projects just to show progress on the trail. But I think for today's discussion, we would just look at the candidate projects that we have that are part of the Birthplace of America Trail to see if there are pieces that we can constrain based on the revenue forecasts we have. And clearly, we can't afford the entire one. Some of them are marked. Some of them I know I was able to catch talking with stakeholders, and I would put in parentheses that this is part of the Birthplace of America Trail, but I don't know that I've caught them all. So Keith can start to scroll down, and if we miss one, just throw up your hand. And Keith, I'm sorry, I don't know if I put it in the project name or if there it is under project purpose. Monticello Avenue bike lane's the first one we come to that's part of the boat. Any objections to constraining that project? I want to say there's 2 or 3 more. You can see what they all are. We keep scrolling down, Keith. There's another one, Carter's Grove. And Steve's on the call too. He can. Oh, I guess we'll come back to this purple one. That is one that's a smart scale recommendation. So that is one that we should constrain. It's part of the Southampton Roads Trail. Keep scrolling down. It's the only. I think that's maybe the only 2 that I know to call out as part of the vote. That's a candidate project for the 2025 LRTP.
Dale, scroll all the way to the bottom. Isn't Victory Boulevard, isn't that the one that just changed?
The proposed Pocosin connector, is that what that is?
No, isn't that the part of that project that was just funded? Or no?
No, that's
Okay,
to fill.
sure.
That's to fill the gap between the two the 2 segments that have been funded.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question.
So it is part of the vote?
No. I mean, it's part of that Pocosin, you know, like going towards Pocosin, yes.
Okay, if we scroll back up, and as you scroll back up, Keith, I think we should go ahead and constrain that western branch, since that is a smart scale recommendation. And then Tracy, I had a question for you as Keith scrolls back up. Troy had sent me an email about Western Branch Phase 1, and he said that the city was getting ready to receive some sort of funding and that it could become committed. There's just under $1 million left that we're reflecting. Do you know what that other funding source is?
I think that we're funding it, but I'm not sure. I know that I saw the email that that Troy sent. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think that's like we're moving forward on that now.
That was kind of what I thought he meant by that. So
yeah,
do you have objections to us showing local funding to constrain this project?
No, I think that's correct.
Dale, this is Carolyn from Williamsburg. The Monticello Avenue shared use path is completed.
Oh, perfect. All right, so we will constrain that one.
And it's a very nice path.
Perfect. See, this is when you do 5 years of planning, you guys keep making progress when we get to this point. So, I guess, do we want to focus more on the boat or talk about some of the, I think that might be the only active CMAC RSTP project.
Hey, Dale, this is Eric. I had a question about the Suffolk, it's part of the Southampton Roads Trail. Is that overlapping with the boat? It's more back up to the top, Key.
It is not,
Just-
Eric. It continues, you know, the South End of Roads Trail. Dale, I would suggest that if we can, you know, do pick a couple sections of the South End of Roads Trail to be constrained too, because some of those projects are, you know, both termini of completed sections in different areas, and you know, like Virginia Beach's section just got done with their engineering study over the last year or two. So
Yes, great points. I guess since the boat was the highest scoring, and then Southampton Roads Trail was the second highest scoring, let's just start with those two pieces. We cannot fund the entirety of both projects, so I just need to hear feedback from the committee, and maybe to make it easier, I don't know if you want to separate boat and then Southampton Roads Trail pieces, or tackle them both at the same time.
Well, Dale, one thing we might could do is to, since we don't have these broken up into like sub projects, it's just constrain a portion of the funds we have left, and then let the projects decide which pieces, and then come back, and then keep a little bit of it to fund some of these other bits as well.
That's a great suggestion, but how much would we know to set aside for each of these major projects, and then still have the opportunity for some of these other trails to be constrained in the plan?
Well, we've got what, 112 million or so.
Yes. So what were the cost estimates for Carter's Grove and Monticello? I think I saw.
Carter's Grove's at 10.4.
And then Monticello's 7. So we definitely can constrain those two pieces. And then you still have maybe some set aside as Josh just suggested.
I think if you went as far as the 15 for each trail, that would still give you 32 in Cmac money to put towards other trail projects, and would allow for painful segments to come in.
Yeah, I agree with Brian. Somewhere between 15 and 20 for each of those, and then the remainder kind of spread out among the other projects, or if there's something else like that. 264 flyover, that's kind of expensive, but that's a definite hard stop one there for people connecting.
This South Side Bike Trail, is that part of any of these, of the Southampton Roads Trail, or is it?
Sounds like a subset of the Southampton Road.
Dale, it is the same alignment as the Southampton Roads Trail.
And also Elaine Lynn, Virginia Beach, the following line item 708, the Virginia Beach Trail, that is the Virginia Beach oceanfront part. That's the entire Virginia Beach. So it does seem that 709 seems redundant.
Okay, so we can skip those for now if we have this 15 million on each of these major trails, right? From understanding the suggestion.
I'm sorry, could you clarify that? I just want to make sure that we're not skipping the Southampton's Roads and Virginia Beach Trail. What was that again?
So the suggestion that was made is right now we're setting aside 15 million each for Birthplace of America Trail and the Southampton Roads Trail. And then offline we can sort of speak to what pieces, you know, as localities move forward, what that would actually fund in terms of segments. We would just reflect the overall trail in the 2045 LRTP. Any objections so far to that? And then we'd start looking at some of these non-Birthplace of America and non-Southampton Roads Trail. understanding there's still money on the table, we may make that 15 larger as we're going down the list.
Not an objection, but a question. If we are to eliminate the redundancy of the South Side Bike Trail in order to equally fund 15 million to the Birthplace of America Trail and 15 million to the Southampton Roads Trail, can we redefine the termini of the Southampton Roads Trail so that it doesn't say Suffolk to Virginia Beach, Suffolk to Virginia Oceanfront as the other line item does? Just to clarify that we're not stopping at the city limit line, but going all the way through the city?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, so then the next project would be bike path along Shore Drive, Hampton Boulevard, and Little Creek Road, which actually shows as 0, so I guess that's already, with previous allocations, those two are automatically by default in the plan, so we can skip over those two. Portsmouth Rail to Trail. Is that part of anything we've just constrained? I'm sorry, I don't know these
Yeah,
smaller pieces.
that's an important part of the Southampton Roads Trail, and we're actually trying to advertise for that for construction this year.
So do we need to show that separately from the Southampton Roads Trail, or just showing Southampton Roads Trail and the LRTP is fine, we'll capture this?
I'm not sure how it would work. I mean, it's an active project. It is fully funded from previous years, and I'm not sure exactly how you want to list it on here, though.
It's kind of
Fully
a hesitation to use a
year,
blind big no. I'm sorry, Brian?
fully funded preceding year fund, old money. Is it part of the constraint for the new money from 21 to 45?
Yeah, it probably is.
So
I
it's
think it should be
more of
included.
not a candidate project, but a committed project from previous funding.
So we're showing that it still needs $500,000 after 2020. We would need to reflect in the 2045. From
Okay.
21 to 2045, it still needs $500,000.
Excellent.
All right, I think we should just go ahead and just allocate that for this one.
Okay, and the next one, that's also a part of Southampton Roads Trail, so any objections to not calling out this project separately?
Is no one from the city of Suffolk going to speak up on that one? They
No,
did
that's
have a
fine.
small scale section phase 3B that did not make the recommended funding scenario.
For the Suffolk Railroad Trail, Suffolk Seaboard?
I mean, this is part of that boat trail, but we want to make sure that we move forward with funding on this one as we've been building it in sections.
So Eric, here's a question for me. If we show the overall boat and we show the overall Southampton Roads Trail in our LRTP, as these localities apply for smart scale and they reference their smaller nomenclature, like if Suffolk applies and says this is for the Suffolk Seaboard coastline, is there going to be any issue that it's not, because we're only showing the parent project essentially on the LRTP? It would be fine, right?
I think so, Dale, because I mean, they're pieces of the overall, and I think the way you have the 15 million broken out, but we just have to be careful that people understand that a particular segment may be already included in the plan, but we just need to know which ones.
Okay, so then the next two projects, they look like they're part of Southampton Roads Trail. So we can go down to line 36. Is Dahlia Creek independent of our two regional trails?
Elaine Lynn, Virginia, yes, that is completely independent.
Thank you. And so then we have the 264 pedestrian land bridge flyover.
Also completely independent, but in the
Okay.
Hey, Dale, did we skip
well as the
over
next one.
Complete High Street?
So Carl, that's we're showing that's part of Southampton Roads Trail.
Yeah.
So it's going to be covered by us setting aside funding for Southampton Roads Trail. Unless there's something where you need us to separate this out.
Well, I think so because it's similar to Ports and Railroad Trail. I mean, it's an independent project, and
Okay.
so it would need its own set of money funding for it.
Okay, so we can go ahead and put a yes by that key. Sure, that's separate. All right, any objections to the 264 pedestrian land bridge flyover? I'm seeing a Virginia Beach theme here. Dahlia Creek?
Same status.
We're getting close here to expending all the Cmac Northampton Boulevard.
Not part of the Southampton's Roads Trail either.
Okay.
The 26th Street's an independent project.
So that we'll expend all the Cmac and then move over to transportation alternatives. Right, so Monticello Avenue bike lanes will be covered by Birthplace of America. So then we have multi-use 25th.
Independent as well.
Dahlia Creek. Which
Also independent with the other Dahlia Creeks.
Military Highway. Bike access. I'm going to assume that's independent.
It's independent, Dale.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Now, one of the things we want to keep in mind, I know we're just using the scores here, we want to make sure that we're also being representative across the country, or in the country, region. Maybe before we expend the rest of this, sort of take a look at what else is on this list. If there are any projects from any other localities on the line that you would like reflected in the LRTP, let us know as we get down to the last little bits here of fiscal constraint.
Dale, one other thing we may want to do, we've had a lot of projects that are all part of the Southampton or the boat trail. We got about 15 million left. We may want to go back and put another 5 million or 7 million in each of those. And that's something for discussion just because we've got a lot of projects in those and that covers kind of a lot of area. So that's just something to think about as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. I kind of think the 15 might be low. And I just as from the regional perspective, I do see it's very urban heavy right now. Before we constrain all of these, there are some Virginia Beach projects that are pretty hefty I'd like to see if there are any other, in our more, like in our counties or other areas that we could include those projects in the plan. But there's so many of these, I need the localities to speak up if there's something that we can include.
Nominations.
There remains a line item in Virginia Beach Scarborough Bridge. It's line item 746. That does not need to be on the list at all. That saves. It's not a heavy hitter, but it saves a little bit.
And then also one of them, there's multiple of these thalias. We might want to remove one of the thalias if there's other county projects or other cities that just aren't as heavily represented from this candidate list.
Dale, this is Mark Shea from Virginia Beach. And I just wanted to double check again on the local contributions. If we carry those forward, Elaine's CIP has $425,000 a year. If you put local contributions on those projects, it doesn't commit that we have to spend it on those projects when the time comes, does it?
No, but it would permit us to show these Virginia Beach projects.
Right. It just shows it for fiscal constraint, but not for programming. So Elaine can then spend it, whatever she needs to spend it on as the time comes.
Right. Exactly.
So,
And I think our other localities would be appreciative too. If they don't have the same resources, we could be using Cmac and transportation alternatives to include other projects that aren't in Virginia Beach that have access to the local funds.
so that could maybe get all the Virginia Beach projects on there with local too.
And
Thank you, Mark.
Beach,
Does that sound okay, Elaine?
I appreciate them, but thank you, Mark. I think it makes me a little nervous to start eliminating the projects. But what I do suggest is, for example, the Creek Greenway Phase 6 could be combined. The reason why we can't even eliminate, to your point, Dale, or your question was, well, can we maybe knock off one of the failures? Phase 6 is tied directly to the I-264 flyover. So we can't fly over to nothing. So, but we could perhaps combine those two and then reduce the total, which I think right now, where are we at? 34, over 34. So we could maybe reduce that to 25 total or 30.
And use local funding.
Does that help? Sorry?
And use the local funding assumption that Mark had mentioned?
Well, we're using the local funding assumption regardless, but I'm saying, I'm just trying to, cherry pick a few ways to trim.
So we weren't using any Virginia Beach local for any of these. So we would need to change those assumptions if it is local funding for these Virginia Beach projects. We were using regional assumptions.
Yeah, the local funding, when I'm budgeting assuming there's a 20% component of local match. Something like Greenwich, I've been told it's gonna be 50%, but yeah, the project budget, total budget. So Katie and Mike would have to speak to the rest.
This is Katie from Virginia Beach. So Elaine, what we typically do is we fund the regional projects based on the scores and spread it around as much as possible. And any high priority projects left over, we could fund with the local money, which broken out is about $11 to $12 million. So it's not a significant amount of local money on the active transportation. And yes, typically TAP does have a 20% local commitment, but this is just a planning level document. We're allocating, monopoly money or potential funds at this point. These are not like awarded projects that we're going forward and moving. And I hope that kind of clarifies it.
Katie, you threw out about 11 million for local funding for active transportation for the 21-2045.
I think it's going to be about that, yeah, somewhere in the $11 to $12 million range.
So if we assume 11 million now, so one of these projects, we could go ahead and reflect that 11 million of Virginia Beach local funding And then that way we can see what's left over for some other localities and then start going back down the prioritization scores. Maybe that's a good approach. Keith, can you find a Virginia Beach project that is close to or can total up to the 11 million? Or maybe we can do some partial if it's easier. So Katie, Elaine, Mark, is that okay assumption?
I think that works because, it's not a programming document, so it doesn't lock us into actually using exactly those funds, but it does physically constrain it that we can get on the plan. So it looks good to me.
What was that Gloucester project, Keith? Did we?
Carol from Gloucester, I can speak to that. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we have two on there. The first one that scored higher than the other is the Beaver Dam to, Main Street to Beaver Dam. That is currently has, I think it's 2026 Cmac dollars on it. We're not sure if the cost estimate is accurate. We're trying to get VDOT to kind of start to look at that and program it to see if we have enough dollars. So if that one could be added, that would be great.
Is it the one that Keith highlighted?
Yep. And the other one is more expensive and like the second from the bottom. So I think maybe some other localities might want to jump in above ours.
Thank you, Carol. Have other localities we haven't heard from today that would like to weigh in?
I would put forth the Strawberry Plains Road shared use path. This is Carolyn from Williamsburg.
I think you already went by it.
Yeah, we're trying to do a circuit there for bikers in the city, so that's a pretty important section for us.
Any other localities before we return to the prioritization scores?
This is Lynn from Hampton. I would support putting more money onto boat just because that's where most of our projects are included. We've tried to match up any of our active transportation along boat to try to fill in the gap. So we would be supportive of adding some more there.
Before we add more, this Southside Bike Trail, and I'm sorry if someone already said this, is this different? Is this part of any of these regional trails?
Dale, that is the same alignment, I think. I'd have to look at the GIS layer to it. But I can't remember our conversations with Elaine. This isn't the one that we combined with.
Oh, it is. Yeah, I'm sorry. We did say we're combining it.
Okay, so so put an X to that just so you remember.
So how much more does the committee think we need to add to, and would it just be boat or boat and Southampton Roads Trail?
I think we just, at this point, all the other projects that are major concerns are funded. We just split that 20 million in half.
All right. Questions or comments?
Hey Dale, this is Sam, TPO staff. Just clarification. I looked at the map and the south side bike trail from Chesapeake to the ocean front starts just west of 664. The one above it starts in downtown Suffolk.
And so I'm trying to envision in my mind downtown Suffolk versus west of 664. Downtown Suffolk is more west of 664, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So it's the same path. It's just different pieces.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam.
Have further comments, questions on the slate as shown? Hearing none, can I get a motion to recommend this slate?
This is Josh Mortwater. I'll make a motion that we recommend this.
Thank you. Have a motion. Can I get a second?
A second, Carl from Portsmouth.
Thank you, Carl. Any discussions on the motion? Hearing none, I'll proceed to roll call vote.
Okay, Tracy Jones Schoenfeld,
Yes.
Daryl Rizzio,
Yes.
Lynn Keenan,
Yes.
Jamie Oliver,
Yes.
Paul Holt,
Yes.
Brian Stilley,
Yes.
Debbie Mangiaracina,
Yes.
Carl Jackson,
Yes.
Beth Lewis,
Yes.
Robert Lewis, if Robert's not here, Jason Souders,
Yes.
Katie Shannon,
Yes.
Carolyn Murphy,
Yes.
Tim Cross,
Yes.
Ray Amoruso.
Ray's gone, but I'll vote yes for HRT.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Josh Moore,
Yes.
Grant Sparks, Eric Stringfield,
Yes.
Barb Nelson,
Yes.
and last call for Grant Sparks. Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your work. Dale, if I'm not mistaken, this meeting have a fourth meeting.
When I actually have time to catch my breath and look at all of these together, it's like herding cats. I'll send an email if we need to have a fourth meeting just to firm up any assumptions we're making.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Got a lot done over the last few days. I appreciate everyone's patience and time commitment for this. Does anyone have any old or new business for the group? Any party questions?
Oh, Mr. Chair, this is Katie Shannon with Virginia Beach. I was just wondering, so the plan is to present this for TTAC next, I guess that's next Wednesday?
The draft.
The draft.
Yeah, we will not be seeking TTAC recommendation. We're going to initiate the 30-day public review at TTAC.
Okay, so it would be TTAC recommendation for approval in March with HRTPO approval in March as well?
Yes, currently we don't have a March board meeting, but we might need to have a March board meeting in order for us to keep conformity on track. But yes, TTAC March and then board March, maybe April, but that's kind of pushing things.
Okay, understood. And I remember yesterday too, we had earmarked that 50 million for the study portion. Did we have a chance to circle back on that, or is that one of the cleanup items that you were mentioning?
That will be one of the cleanup items.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate all of the staff's hard work on this. I know it's been a huge lift.
I appreciate everyone joining. I know this has been difficult back-to-back meetings.
All right. Anything else from the floor? We'll stand adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.